war had ended, but no one could say exactly when. Some claimed it was the day the last cannon fell silent beyond the Red Cliffs. Others swore it was when the railroad bosses shook hands with the cattle barons, over a table still sticky with blood. But in the territories west of the Rio Sangre, war did not end. It sank into the soil, mixed with whiskey, and waited. On the evening the stranger came to Black Hollow, the wind carried that taste. Dust rolled through the single main street like a living thing, slithering around hitching posts and rattling the shutters of abandoned shops. The sky was bruised purple, the sun half drowned behind jagged mesas. A battered wooden sign creaked above the largest building in town, the Last Chance Saloon. The bat-wing doors groaned open. Conversations faltered. Boot heels struck the floorboards, slow, deliberate. The stranger paused just inside, letting the haze of cigar smoke and lamplight swallow him. He wore a long, ash-gray duster that had seen too many winters, a hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. A thin scar cut across his jaw, like a pale lightning bolt. No badge, no uniform. But he carried war on his shoulders like an old saddle. The piano player missed a note. At the bar, 3 men laughed too loudly. Their laughter had the heavy slur of men who had been drinking since noon and hadn't found enough at the bottom of the bottle to drown what chased them. They wore mismatched remnants of old regiments, blue cuffs, gray sashes, brass buttons ripped from uniforms long surrendered. Drunken beasts. One of them noticed the newcomer and squinted. "You lost, friend?" The stranger did not answer. He removed his gloves, finger by finger, setting them carefully on the counter. His hands were steady. Too steady. "Whiskey," he said. His voice carried the calm of a man who had already buried everyone he loved. The bartender hesitated. "We don't get many travelers, just passing through." No one ever just passed through Black Hollow. A crash erupted from the far corner. A chair splintered against the wall. A young woman stumbled backward, her dark hair falling loose from its braid. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her apron, once white, was stained with spilled beer and something darker. "Please," she said, voice thin but defiant. "Let go." One of the drunken men, the biggest of the 3, had her wrist clamped in his fist. His eyes were glazed, but there was sharp cruelty beneath the fog. "You owe us, sweetheart," he slurred. "Your pa borrowed money for that farm. War's over, debts ain't," the other 2 laughed. The stranger lifted his whiskey, but didn't drink it. The girl's gaze darted across the room, searching for help, finding none. The townsfolk studied their glasses with sudden fascination. In Black Hollow, interference got you buried. The big man yanked her closer. "We'll collect our payment tonight." The stranger set his untouched glass down. "You should release her," he said quietly. The words were not loud, but they cut through the saloon like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. The room froze. The big man turned, still gripping the girl. "What did you say?" I said. The stranger replied, stepping away from the bar. "You should release her." Silence thickened. One of the other men snorted. "You got a death wish, old-timer." The stranger's eyes finally lifted beneath the brim of his hat. They were not the eyes of an old man. They were the eyes of someone who had seen cavalry lines break under cannon fire. The eyes of someone who knew exactly how fast a body could fall. "Not tonight," he said. The big man shoved the girl toward one of his companions and stepped forward. "You don't know who you're talking to." "That's true," the stranger agreed. "But I know what you are." The insult landed like a spark in dry grass. The man reached for his revolver. What happened next unfolded faster than thought. A blur of gray, the snap of leather, the thunderclap of a gunshot. The chandelier above the center of the room exploded, raining sparks and shattered glass. Lamps went dark, screams erupted. Smoke and dust swallowed everything. But there had been only one shot, and it hadn't hit any man. When the haze thinned, the stranger stood exactly where he had been. Revolver lowered, barrel still whispering smoke. The big man's gun lay on the floor several feet away, shot clean from his hand. Blood trickled from his knuckles, where the bullet had grazed. The girl stared at the stranger, as though she had witnessed something impossible. The drunken men did not move. "You missed," one of them muttered shakily. The stranger tilted his head. "No," he said. Then he cocked the hammer again. From outside, a new sound drifted into the saloon. Hooves, many of them. Not the lazy shuffle of ranch horses. Disciplined, coordinated, military. The stranger's expression shifted, just slightly. He had not expected that. Neither had the drunken men. Their confidence flickered. The saloon doors burst open. But it wasn't lawmen who entered. It was something worse. Men in long black coats stepped inside, their boots silent against the floorboards. Each wore a silver badge shaped like a coiled serpent, devouring its own tail. A symbol few in the territories dared to speak aloud. The order. And every single one of them was looking at the stranger. One of the black-coated men smiled. "Well," he said, removing his hat, "if it isn't Captain Elias Crowe." The name fell into the room like a coffin lid slamming shut. The girl's breath caught. The drunken beasts stepped back, suddenly sober. Captain. The war hadn't ended for him. It had followed him here. Elias Crowe slowly holstered his revolver. "I was hoping," he said calmly. "You boys were dead." The man with the serpent badge chuckled. "We are." Outside, thunder rolled across a cloudless sky, and somewhere in Black Hollow, a church bell began ringing on its own. The church bell did not stop ringing. It tolled once, twice, then fell into a frantic, uneven rhythm, as if some invisible hand were yanking the rope in panic. The sound slithered through the broken chandelier smoke and wrapped itself around every heartbeat in the saloon. No one moved. The men in black coats spread out in a slow arc, boots whispering across glass shards. Their silver serpent badges glinted in the flicker of the remaining oil lamps, a coiled Ouroboros, devouring its own tail. The order never rode openly, yet here they stood. Inside, Black Hollow. Inside, the Last Chance Saloon. Captain Elias Crowe did not turn his head. He watched them through the mirror behind the bar, their reflections bending in warped glass, counting, measuring distance, hands, holsters, windows, 6 inside, more outside. The girl had not taken her eyes off him. "Captain?" she whispered, barely audible. One of the drunken men stammered. "You said the war was over." The leader of the black coats raised a gloved hand. Silence fell instantly. He was tall and narrow-shouldered, with a thin silver streak in his dark hair. His smile never touched his eyes. "You see," he said lightly, "the war ended for the flags, not for the architects." He stepped forward. "Gentlemen," he addressed the drunken trio without looking at them, "your services are no longer required." A flash of confusion crossed their faces. "What services?" the big one croaked. The answer came in 3 muffled pops. Not from Crowe. From the black coats. 3 suppressed gunshots. The drunken beasts dropped where they stood, lifeless before their bodies hit the floorboards. The girl gasped. The townsfolk screamed and scattered. Crowe didn't flinch. He stared at the bodies. "They were bait," he said quietly. The leader of the order inclined his head. "You were always quick." "Not quick enough," Crowe replied. A lantern shattered as someone bolted for the door. Gunfire answered from outside, sharp, efficient. The scream ended abruptly. The leader removed a folded paper from his coat pocket. "We've been searching for you a long time, Captain Crowe. I retired." "No," the man corrected gently. "You deserted." Crowe's jaw tightened. "I fulfilled my contract." The serpent-badged man's smile widened. "You were the contract." The girl took a slow step backward, edging toward the stairs that led to the saloon's upper rooms. One of the black coats noticed. He reached for her. Crowe moved. His hand flashed. Not to his revolver this time, but to the bar. He hurled the untouched whiskey glass into the oil lamp above the black coat's head. Flame erupted. The man stumbled back, coat catching fire. Another shouted, trying to smother it. Crowe kicked the bar stool into the nearest attacker and dove behind an overturned table as bullets tore through the air. Gunfire roared. The saloon exploded into chaos. Wood splintered. Bottles shattered. Smoke thickened. Crowe fired twice. Controlled, surgical. One black coat spun and fell. Another collapsed with a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. But the order did not panic. They adapted. Two men overturned a poker table for cover. Another vaulted the bar with impossible speed. Crowe rolled, narrowly avoiding a blade that embedded itself in the floor where his throat had been a second earlier. A blade. Not standard issue. The order had changed. "Alive!" the leader called calmly. "He's worth more breathing." Crowe's eyes flicked toward the girl. She had reached the staircase, but two black coats were already ascending from outside. They had surrounded the building. Of course they had. Crowe ducked as a bullet carved a groove into the wall behind him. He slid across the floor, grabbed a fallen shotgun from one of the drunken corpses, and fired upward toward the balcony. The blast shattered the railing and sent one of the ascending men hurtling backward down the stairs. The second leapt, impossibly far, clearing the broken banister entirely. Crowe saw the silver glint mid-air. Not a badge. Teeth. Filed to points. The man landed crouched on the balcony, like something feral. The order had not merely reorganized after the war. They had evolved. Crowe felt something unfamiliar coil in his chest. Doubt. The leader watched him through the haze. "You look surprised, Captain." "What did you do?" Crowe demanded. "Improvement," the man replied softly. "You began it, we perfected it." The words struck deeper than bullets. Crowe fired the shotgun again, blasting apart a support beam. The balcony sagged violently. The feral black coat lost balance, crashing down in a storm of debris. Crowe sprinted for the staircase. Gunfire chased him. A bullet tore through his sleeve, grazing his arm. Blood seeped instantly. He didn't slow. Halfway up, he collided with the girl. "You need to leave," she said breathlessly. "There's a back." "I know." Her eyes widened. "You've been here before?" Crowe didn't answer. A heavy crash shook the saloon below. The leader's voice rose above the chaos. "Seal the rear exit!" Crowe swore under his breath. They were always one step ahead. The girl grabbed his hand. "There's a hidden cellar beneath the stage. My father built it during the raids." Crowe hesitated only a second. Trust was dangerous, but staying meant death, or worse. Another explosion of gunfire shredded the staircase railing. Crowe wrapped an arm around her and leapt from the midpoint of the stairs, crashing onto the saloon stage below as bullets ripped through the wood where they'd stood. He shoved aside the velvet curtain, boots thudding against hollow boards. "There!" she pointed. A trapdoor nearly invisible beneath scattered crates. Crowe yanked it open. Shouts erupted behind them. Black coats closing fast. The leader's voice rang cold and triumphant. "Do not damage the merchandise." Crowe froze for a fraction of a heartbeat. "Merchandise?" The girl stared at him. "What does that mean?" Bootsteps thundered closer. Crowe grabbed her hand again. "It means," he said grimly, "they didn't come just for me. They dropped into darkness just as bullets tore through the stage above." The trapdoor slammed shut. And for the first time in years, Captain Elias Crowe realized something far worse than war had begun. They landed hard. Dust exploded upward as their boots struck packed earth. The impact drove the air from the girl's lungs. Crowe caught her before she collapsed, steadying her against the damp stone wall of the cellar. Above them, gunfire ripped through the saloon floorboards. Bootsteps pounded. The order was tearing the place apart. Crowe shut the trapdoor carefully, lowering it without sound. Darkness swallowed them whole. For 3 seconds, there was nothing but breathing. Then the girl struck a match. The tiny flame flared to life, revealing a narrow underground chamber lined with old crates, rusted tools, and shelves of preserved food long past its prime. A single lantern hung from a nail in the wall. She lit it. Flickering amber light spread across the cellar. It wasn't just a storage space, it was a bunker. Gun racks lined one side, mostly empty now. A crude map of Black Hollow had been pinned to the wall. Several streets were circled in charcoal. Red X's marked buildings. Crowe stepped closer. The markings were recent. "This wasn't for raiders," he muttered. The girl swallowed. "My father said the war would follow us west. He said some men don't stop fighting when treaties are signed." "What's your name?" Crowe asked. "Lillian." She hesitated. "Lillian Hale." Crowe's head turned sharply. Hale. He knew that name. Not from the town. From a battlefield. "Your father," Crowe said slowly. "Was he Samuel Hale?" Her eyes widened. "You knew him." Crowe didn't answer right away. Above them, heavy furniture scraped across the saloon floor. The order was methodical, searching. "He served under me," Crowe said finally. Lillian stepped back as though struck. "You're that Crowe," not a question. A realization. "You left them," she said, voice tightening. "The men who followed you into the canyon? My father said you rode out alone." Crowe's jaw hardened. "They were already dead. You didn't go back for the bodies." "No." The word was steel. Silence settled between them, heavy, unresolved. A sudden boom shook dust from the ceiling. They had found the trapdoor. Crowe moved instantly. "Is there another exit?" Lillian nodded. "A tunnel." "It leads past the old church. Show me." They hurried to the back wall, where a wooden shelving unit concealed a narrow opening. Crowe shoved it aside. A cold draft breathed from the darkness beyond. As they stepped into the tunnel, the trapdoor above splintered. Light poured down, voices. "He's below!" Crowe pulled the lantern wick low, dimming it. The tunnel was barely tall enough to stand in. Earth walls reinforced with rough beams stretched ahead into blackness. The air smelled of clay and something else. Burnt sulfur. Crowe froze. He recognized that scent. Explosives. "Stop!" he whispered. Lillian nearly collided with him. "What is it?" Crowe crouched, fingers brushing along the tunnel floor. A thin wire lay half buried in dirt, running along the beam supports toward the cellar. "They rigged it," he breathed. Above them, the leader's voice echoed faintly through the broken floorboards. "Captain Crowe!" "You always preferred dramatic exits. Let's oblige you." Crowe lunged forward, following the wire deeper into the tunnel. He found it. A crude charge wired to a detonator, nailed into a support post. Timed. Not remote. "Seconds left." "Run!" he shouted. He grabbed Lillian and shoved her forward as he fired a single shot into the detonator mechanism. Sparks erupted. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The blast roared through the cellar behind them, collapsing the bunker in a thunder of dirt and flame. The shockwave hurled them down the tunnel like rag dolls. The lantern shattered. Darkness consumed everything. Crowe slammed against the tunnel wall, shielding Lillian with his body as debris rained down. The tunnel groaned. Support beams cracked. Earth shifted. Another tremor. Then stillness. Dust choked the air. Lillian coughed violently. "We're alive," Crowe rasped. "For now." Behind them, the tunnel had collapsed entirely. Escape back to the saloon was impossible. Which meant, "They wanted us moving forward," Crowe said quietly. Footsteps echoed from the darkness ahead. Not from behind. From ahead. Lillian's grip tightened on his sleeve. They couldn't have known about this tunnel. Crowe's expression turned grim. They knew. A faint glow flickered in the distance. Lantern light. Silhouettes formed at the far end of the tunnel. Not black coats. These shapes were smaller, thinner, and they carried rifles. One voice called out, young, trembling, "Don't move." Crowe slowly raised his hands. Figures stepped into the dim glow. Teenagers, no older than 16, wearing mismatched scraps of military uniforms, and every single one of them bore the silver serpent badge pinned crookedly over their hearts. Lillian gasped. "They're just kids!" One of the boys stepped forward. His face was pale but determined. "We're not kids," he said. His eyes locked onto Crowe. "You trained us." Crowe's blood ran cold. "I've never seen you before." The boy's expression twisted. "You don't remember the second program?" The word hit like another explosion. Program. Behind the line of armed youths, a familiar figure stepped into view, brushing dust from his black coat. The leader, unharmed, smiling. "You always did forget your unfinished projects, Captain." Crowe stared at him. "No," he said slowly. The leader tilted his head. "Oh, yes." He gestured to the children with a casual sweep of his hand. "You built the foundation. We simply raised the next generation." Rifles clicked in unison. Lillian whispered, "What did you do?" Crowe did not answer, because for the first time since walking into Black Hollow, he wasn't sure he was the hero of this story. The tunnel felt smaller, with rifles aimed at Crowe's chest. The teenagers stood in a disciplined line, lantern light carving sharp shadows into faces far too young for war. Their serpent badges gleamed like cold eyes watching him. Crowe studied them. Posture rigid, breathing controlled, trigger fingers steady, not amateurs, engineered. The leader brushed dust from his sleeve, as though the explosion had been nothing more than an inconvenience. "You see it now, don't you?" he said softly. "The symmetry." Crowe's voice came low. "I shut the second program down." A boy on the left barked a hollow laugh. "You left," the words echoed. Crowe's jaw tightened. "I reported it to command." "There was no command," the leader replied. "There was only us." Lillian stepped closer to Crowe, despite the rifles trained on him. "What is the second program?" The leader looked delighted. "Oh, Miss Hale, your father never told you bedtime stories about Captain Crowe's little experiment?" Crowe's eyes flashed. "Leave her out of this." "But she's already in it," the leader said gently. He nodded to one of the teens, a girl with cropped hair and a thin scar along her temple. She stepped forward and reached into her coat. Lillian flinched. Instead of a weapon, the girl produced a folded photograph. She held it up. Crowe felt the air leave his lungs. It was a field photograph from years ago, taken after the Battle of Red Canyon. He stood in the center, younger but unmistakable. Around him were a group of boys barely into adolescence, dirty faces, determined eyes, the first recruits. "The war was chewing through men," the leader said calmly. "You propose something radical. Train them younger. Faster reflexes. No fear of death because they hadn't yet learned what life was worth." "I was ordered." "You designed it," the leader interrupted. Crowe's silence confirmed it. The teens watched him, not with hatred, but something worse. Disillusionment. "You said we'd be heroes," the boy at the front said quietly. "You said we'd end the war before we grew old." Crowe's voice roughened. "How many of you survived the canyon?" The boy hesitated. The leader answered instead. "None." Lillian's breath hitched. Crowe's eyes burned. "I pulled you out before that assault." "No," the leader corrected. "You pulled yourself out. You objected to what we became." He stepped closer. "You saw what accelerated conditioning did. The altered responses. The heightened aggression." Crowe looked at the filed teeth of one of the teens and understood. Chemical enhancement. Pain suppression. They had perfected the formula. "You refined it," Crowe said. "We improved it," the leader replied smoothly. "No more instability. No more hesitation." The girl with the scar tilted her head. "You abandoned us when we were close." Crowe met her gaze. "You were children." "And now?" she asked. A long pause. Now they were weapons. The tunnel trembled faintly. Distant hooves passing above ground. More of the order securing the town. Black Hollow was already theirs. Lillian whispered, "Why me? Why did you call me merchandise?" The leader's eyes slid toward her. Because you are valuable. Crowe shifted slightly, putting himself between her and the rifles. The leader smiled. Samuel Hale discovered something before he died. Lillian went pale. My father didn't die of fever. No, the leader agreed pleasantly. He died because he began asking questions. Crowe's voice turned deadly. What did he find? The leader studied him for a moment, weighing how much to reveal. Oil is temporary, gold is finite, but war can be manufactured. He gestured toward the teenagers. This is the future. Not nations, not flags. Private armies grown from childhood, loyal only to the architects. Crowe felt something cold settle in his bones. The order wasn't a remnant of war. It was the blueprint for the next one. Samuel Hale found the funding trail, the leader continued. Rail magnates, bankers, governors, all investing in a conflict that hasn't happened yet. Lillian's voice trembled but did not break. And me? The leader's gaze sharpened. Your father hid his ledger before we could retrieve it. Silence. The pieces clicked into place. Crowe looked at Lillian. You know where it is. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. The leader sighed. We assumed he told you. When you didn't come willingly, we applied pressure. By sending those drunk animals? Crowe asked. Disposable assets, the leader replied. Effective bait. The teens did not react. Crowe's mind raced. They were outnumbered, surrounded underground. The tunnel behind collapsed. But the leader had made one mistake. He was talking, which meant he wasn't finished yet. Let her go, Crowe said. You want me? The leader's smile faded slightly. We already had you once. A flicker of something dangerous passed through his eyes. And you disappointed us. The rifles tightened. Crowe calculated distance, reaction time, angles. Too risky. Too many. Unless, he glanced at the tunnel ceiling. Old beams, cracked from the explosion. Unstable. Captain, the leader said softly, almost kindly. Kneel. Crowe didn't move. One of the teens stepped closer and pressed a rifle barrel against his chest. You trained us to take decisive action, the boy said. Show us how it's done. Crowe held his gaze. I also taught you to question orders. The boy hesitated. A fraction of a second. Enough. Crowe's boot slammed into the support beam beside him. Wood splintered. The ceiling groaned. What are you? The leader began. Crowe drew and fired upward. The bullet shattered the weakened beam overhead. The tunnel collapsed. Earth cascaded down between them like a falling curtain. Screams. Chaos. Crowe grabbed Lillian and dove sideways as dirt and timber split the tunnel in half. When the dust settled, a wall of debris separated them from the order. Muffled shouting echoed beyond. Crowe pulled Lillian to her feet. Move. They ran deeper into the darkness. Behind them, the leader's voice carried through the rubble, calm despite the chaos. You can't outrun what you created, Captain. Crowe didn't slow, because for the first time, he understood the truth. The Order didn't just want Lillian. They needed what her father hid. And if Samuel Hale had trusted anyone with something that dangerous, it would not have been his daughter. It would have been the man who once commanded him. Crowe. He felt the weight of a memory stir. Something buried. Something he had forced himself to forget. A ledger. A meeting. A promise made in the aftermath of Red Canyon. Lillian looked at him as they ran. You know where it is, don't you? Crowe's silence was answer enough. And somewhere behind them, through the rumble of shifting earth, the leader began to laugh. Part 5. The Ledger Beneath the Altar. They ran until the tunnel narrowed so tightly the walls scraped their shoulders. The air grew colder, damper. Above them, faint vibrations trembled through the earth. Horses repositioning, boots marching. Black Hollow was no longer a town. It was a perimeter. Lillian's breath came fast but steady. She did not complain, did not stumble. Crowe noticed that. You've run before, he said quietly. My father didn't believe in raising helpless daughters. There was steel in her voice. Good. They reached a fork in the tunnel, one path sloping upward, the other plunging deeper into darkness. Crowe didn't hesitate. Up. As they climbed, faint moonlight began to bleed through cracks in old wooden planks above. The church. The bell had stopped ringing. Crowe pressed his palm against the trapdoor overhead and listened. Silence. Too much silence. He lifted it slowly. The trapdoor opened behind the pulpit of Black Hollow's abandoned church. Dusty pews sat empty beneath broken stained glass windows. Moonlight streamed through shattered saints, painting the floor in fractured colors. No order in sight. Not yet. They climbed out. Lillian brushed dirt from her dress. You said you know where it is. Crowe stared at the altar. Memories clawed up from years buried beneath whiskey and regret. After Red Canyon, after the massacre, Samuel Hale had come to him at dusk, face hollow with horror. They're funding both sides, Captain. Crowe had told him to gather proof. Hale had said he'd hide it somewhere holy. Faith is the only thing they won't burn, Hale had said. Crowe stepped toward the altar. The wooden cross above it hung crooked. He reached up and straightened it. Click. A small sound. Lillian stared. Crowe pressed harder. The altar shifted. A hidden compartment slid open beneath it, revealing a narrow iron box coated in dust. Lillian's eyes filled, not with tears, but with vindication. He wasn't mad, she whispered. Crowe lifted the box, heavy, real. He knelt and pried it open with the butt of his revolver. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger and a map. Crowe flipped the ledger open. Names, dozens. Rail barons, steel magnates, governors, military officials, payments logged meticulously, weapons shipments rerouted, conflicts incited deliberately. Lillian leaned over his shoulder. They were planning another war. Crowe's jaw clenched. They were planning ownership of it. A slow clap echoed from the back of the church. Crowe closed the ledger instantly and turned. The leader stood in the doorway, moonlight outlining his silhouette, alone, or pretending to be. You do have a talent for theatrics, Captain, he said mildly. Crowe raised his revolver. Step inside. The leader complied, hands visible, boots echoing softly across the wooden floor. You're outnumbered, Crowe said. Of course, the leader replied. But I'm also patient. He nodded toward the ledger. You finally remember? I remember enough. Lillian's voice cut in. How many towns like this? The leader smiled faintly. Black Hollow is modest. A chill slid down Crowe's spine. You're already building them. Training grounds, the leader corrected. Places where chaos can be refined. Crowe fired a warning shot into the floor at the leader's feet. The leader didn't flinch. You won't kill me, he said calmly. Try me. If you do, the leader continued evenly, every name in that ledger vanishes. Every investor alerted. Every paper trail burned. He gestured lightly. You think this book is the only copy? Crowe didn't answer. Because he didn't know. The leader's eyes shifted to Lillian. Your father believed exposure would end us. And? She demanded. It won't. Silence pressed against the church walls. You see, the leader continued, people don't fear corruption. They fear instability. We offer control. Crowe's finger tightened on the trigger. Through slaughter. Through order. Outside, a horse whinnied sharply. Signal. The leader's gaze flickered briefly toward the window. Time is short, he said softly. Give me the ledger, and the girl walks free. Crowe's voice dropped to a whisper. You don't want the ledger. The leader tilted his head. You want what's not written in it. A pause. The leader's smile thinned. Crowe continued. Hale wasn't foolish enough to document everything. Lillian looked at him, confused. Crowe held the leader's eyes. There's a second record. The church grew very still. For the first time, the leader's composure cracked. Just barely. Where? Crowe smiled faintly. Now you're negotiating. Bootsteps thundered outside. Not one or two. Many. The order had surrounded the church. The leader sighed. You could have ruled with us. I tried, Crowe said quietly, and failed. Learned. The leader's hand moved. Fast. But Crowe was faster. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. The stained glass shattered as bullets tore through colored saints. The leader staggered backward, blood blooming across his side. Crowe felt a burning line across his ribs. They had both hit. The church doors burst open. Black coats flooded in. Crowe grabbed Lillian and flipped the altar, using it as cover as gunfire shredded pews into splinters. Is there another way out? He shouted. She nodded wildly. The bell tower! They crawled behind the overturned altar as bullets hammered into wood. The leader, clutching his side, laughed weakly. You can't expose a system built on human greed, Captain. Crowe risked a glance upward. The bell rope still hung from the ceiling. An idea sparked. He fired at the rope anchor. The massive church bell above shifted violently. Wood beams cracked. The structure groaned. Black coats hesitated. Crowe fired again. The bell tore free. It crashed through the ceiling in an avalanche of timber and iron, slamming into the church floor between Crowe and the advancing order. The impact sent a shockwave through the building. Dust exploded. Walls buckled. Crowe seized the moment. Move! He and Lillian sprinted toward the narrow staircase, leading to the bell tower, as the church began to collapse behind them. Below, amid falling beams and chaos, the leader's voice rose once more. You can't bury what's already rooted. Crowe didn't look back, because he was beginning to understand something terrifying. The order wasn't a secret society. It was a business model, and businesses didn't die. They expanded. As he and Lillian climbed into the trembling tower, flames began licking through the shattered nave below. Black Hollow was burning, and the night was only beginning. The bell tower swayed as if the earth itself were trying to shake them loose. Below, the church groaned under the weight of collapsing beams and falling fire. Smoke clawed upward through the narrow staircase, thick and choking. Crowe shoved the trapdoor above them open and pulled himself onto the wooden platform beneath the shattered roof. Cold night air hit like a blessing. Black Hollow burned. Flames devoured storefronts along the main street. Horses bolted through smoke. Black-coated riders moved like shadows between buildings, herding townsfolk into the square at gunpoint. It wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Lillian stepped beside him, coughing. They're clearing witnesses. Crowe scanned the perimeter. Riders positioned at every road out of town. Riflemen on rooftops. And in the center of the square, a gallows. Fresh timber, already built. His jaw hardened. This wasn't retaliation, he muttered. It was scheduled. A gunshot cracked from below. The leader emerged from the burning church. One hand pressed to his bleeding side, the other raised calmly to signal his men. Even wounded, he radiated control, his eyes lifted. They found Crowe in the tower, and he smiled. A rifleman on the far roof adjusted his aim upward. Crowe saw the glint. Down, he barked. He tackled Lillian as a bullet tore through the wooden beam where her head had been. More shots followed. Splinters exploded around them. We can't stay up here, she shouted. Crowe crawled to the far side of the platform and peered over. Behind the church, the land sloped steeply into a rocky ravine choked with brush. A hard fall, but possible. He turned back and froze. A figure stood at the top of the staircase behind them. One of the teenagers from the tunnel. The boy who had hesitated. Rifle raised, hand steady. You should have stayed gone, the boy said. Crowe slowly rose to one knee. You don't want this. I don't get to want, the boy replied. Smoke curled between them. The boy's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. Crowe's mind moved fast. Distance, 10 feet. Wind, strong cross breeze. Boy's breathing, controlled but faster than before. You hesitated. Crowe said quietly. The boy's jaw flexed. That was training error. No, Crowe said. That was conscience. Below, the leader's voice rang out across the square. Bring him down. Riflemen shifted positions. Time collapsed. The boy's finger began to pull. Lillian moved first. She hurled the iron ledger box at the boy's rifle. Metal slammed into wood. The shot went wide. Crowe lunged. They collided hard, crashing into the railing. The rifle clattered away, skidding toward the edge. The tower shook violently as another bullet struck a support beam. The boy drove an elbow into Crowe's ribs, right where he'd been grazed earlier. White-hot pain exploded through him. Crowe grunted, but held on. You're not a weapon, Crowe growled. I'm necessary, the boy snapped. Crowe twisted, slamming the boy against the railing. Wood cracked. Below, flames climbed higher up the church walls. The leader watched, blood staining his coat, eyes sharp and calculating. Do it, he shouted. The boy's gaze flickered downward at the leader. For half a second, doubt. Crowe saw it, and chose. Instead of striking, he released him. The sudden lack of resistance sent the boy stumbling backward, confused. Crowe grabbed Lillian. Jump! What? Trust me. Bullets tore through the platform as they sprinted to the rear edge. The boy stared at Crowe, stunned. Why didn't you? Crowe didn't answer. He leapt. The world dropped away. Air roared in his ears as he and Lillian plunged into darkness beyond the church. They crashed through brush and tumbled down the rocky slope, stones tearing at skin and fabric. Crowe twisted mid-fall, taking the brunt of the impact as they hit the ravine floor, hard enough to steal breath. For a moment, there was nothing but ringing silence. Then, hooves above, shouts. They went over. Crowe forced himself upright despite the screaming protest of his ribs. Can you run? He asked. Lillian nodded shakily. They plunged into the ravine, staying low beneath brush and shadow. Behind them, riders scrambled along the ridge, torches flaring. A shot rang out. Dirt kicked up inches from Crowe's boot. They'll flank us, Lillian said between breaths. I know. The ravine narrowed ahead, twisting into a slot canyon barely wide enough for two people side by side. Good. Horses couldn't follow. They sprinted into it. Darkness swallowed them. Gunshots echoed uselessly off stone walls. The canyon bent sharply left, then right, then opened abruptly into a small clearing. And there, horses, two of them, saddled, waiting. Crowe slowed. That's too convenient, Lillian whispered. Agreed. Crowe approached cautiously. No visible riders, no movement. Just the horses, shifting nervously. Then a voice emerged from the shadows behind a boulder. You always did make an entrance, Captain. Crowe's hand went to his revolver. A man stepped into the moonlight. Broad shoulders, weathered face. Gray beard braided at the chin. Crowe stared. You're dead, the man chuckled. Been told that before. Lillian looked between them. You know him? Crowe's voice was tight. This is Jonah Briggs. The man tipped his hat slightly. Formerly of your cavalry. Briggs's eyes flicked to the burning glow on the horizon. They're spreading faster than we thought. Crowe narrowed his gaze. You're working against the order? Briggs spat into the dirt. They burned my ranch, took my boy. Silence. The wind carried distant screams from Black Hollow. Briggs nodded toward the horses. Ledger? Crowe held up the iron box. Briggs exhaled slowly. Good. Then we ain't running anymore. Lillian frowned. What do you mean? Briggs looked at Crowe. Means we stop surviving. His eyes hardened, and start hunting. From the canyon entrance, torches flickered closer. The order was coming. Crowe mounted the nearest horse despite the pain in his side. For years he had run from what he built, from what he failed to destroy. But tonight, the fire behind them was no longer something to escape. It was something to answer. He looked at Lillian. Hold tight. She swung into the saddle behind him without hesitation. Briggs mounted his own horse and grinned grimly. "Captain," he said, "ready to finish your program?" Crowe stared towards the dark horizon. "No," he said quietly. "I'm ready to end it." And with that, they rode into the night as Black Hollow burned behind them, unaware that from the bell tower ruins, the hesitant boy watched them disappear. And this time, he did not raise his rifle. They rode hard. The canyon spat them out into open desert where moonlight stretched silver across endless sand and scattered sage. Behind them, Black Hollow glowed like a dying star on the horizon. Crowe didn't look back again. Briggs rode beside him, low in the saddle, eyes scanning ridgelines. "They'll track us till dawn," Briggs muttered. "Maybe longer." "They won't follow blindly," Crowe replied. "Not with that ledger gone." Lillian tightened her grip around Crowe's waist. "Then they'll move ahead of us." Crowe nodded once. She was learning fast. The order didn't chase. They anticipated. A sharp whistle cut through the night. Crowe's hand went to his revolver. Briggs raised a hand. "Easy." 3 figures emerged from the rocks ahead. Not black coats. Ranch hands, scarred, armed, watching. "They're with me," Briggs said. One of the men stepped forward. "That him." Briggs didn't break stride. "That's him." The man studied Crowe with open hostility. "My brother died in Red Canyon." Crowe met his stare. "I remember him." The man blinked, thrown by the answer. Crowe didn't offer apology. He didn't offer defense. He simply carried the weight. Briggs gestured. "We don't have time for ghosts." They rode together toward a cluster of jagged rock formations, rising from the desert floor. Hidden between them, a camp, small, strategic, camouflaged with sand-colored canvas and scrub brush. Horses were tied low, fires were shielded, rifles stacked neatly. This wasn't a random resistance. It was organized. "How many?" Crowe asked as he dismounted stiffly. 37, Briggs replied. "Used to be 60. Crowe absorbed that without reaction. Inside the largest tent, a crude table had been assembled from wagon boards. Maps covered it. Rail lines marked in charcoal. Towns circled. Lillian placed the iron box on the table. Every eye in the tent locked onto it. Briggs shut the flap and lowered his voice. "Show us." Crowe opened the ledger. Murmurs spread as the names were revealed. One of the ranchers swore. "Governor Holbrook," another pointed. "That rail company runs half the freight west of Kansas." "It's bigger than territory," Crowe said quietly. "It's infrastructure." Lillian unfolded the second item from the box. The map. But this one was different. Not towns, not railways, symbols, coordinates. Briggs frowned. "What the hell is that?" Crowe's face darkened. "Training facilities." Silence fell like a blade. "They're not building one army," Crowe continued. "They're building many. Isolated. Self-contained. If one falls, the others survive." "How many?" Lillian asked. Crowe traced the symbols slowly. "More than we can hit directly." Briggs rubbed his jaw. "Then we cut the funding." Crowe shook his head. "They'll replace investors before sunrise." One of the ranchers slammed a fist on the table. "Then what are we even doing?" Crowe looked around the tent. Faces lit by lantern glow. Grief, anger, fear. All of it earned. "You want to stop a machine," Crowe said evenly. "You don't attack the gears." He tapped the map. "You destroy the design." Lillian studied him. "You mean expose it?" "Yes," Briggs snorted. "Expose it to who? The same men funding it?" Crowe met his gaze. "No." He flipped to a page near the back of the ledger. A series of coded entries. Briggs frowned. "That's not payments." "No," Crowe agreed. "It's shipments." He tapped one line. "Experimental." Lillian's eyes widened. "The enhancements." Crowe nodded. "They refined it. But it still requires a central supply." Briggs leaned closer. "You're saying there's a source. There has to be." A young scout burst into the tent, breathless. "They're moving." Briggs turned sharply. "How many?" "2 columns. Fast. Cutting south. Crowe stepped outside. On the horizon, faint dust plumes rose beneath moonlight. "They're not tracking," Lillian said quietly behind him. "No," Crowe agreed. "They're hurting," Briggs cursed under his breath. "They know about this camp." Crowe's eyes hardened. "Of course they do." A distant rifle crack split the night. One of Briggs' outer sentries dropped from his post. Chaos erupted. "Positions!" Briggs roared. Riders crested the northern ridge. Black coats, dozens. Crowe moved instantly. "Break camp," he ordered. "Scatter in pairs. Rendezvous at marker 7. Briggs stared at him for half a heartbeat, then nodded. He trusted Crowe's battlefield instincts. Gunfire exploded across the desert. Men dove for cover behind rocks as bullets tore through canvas. Lillian grabbed a rifle from a supply crate. "You can shoot?" Crowe asked. My father insisted. "Stay close." The first wave of black coats charged down the ridge. But something was wrong. They didn't fire wildly. They advanced in measured intervals, disciplined. Program graduates. Crowe fired twice, precise shots that dropped 2 riders cleanly from their saddles. Briggs led a counterflank to the west, drawing part of the column away. Explosions erupted along the southern ridge. Dynamite. The order had anticipated the retreat routes. "They're closing the box!" someone shouted. Crowe grabbed Lillian's arm. "We cut through the center." "That's suicide!" "No," he said calmly. "It's unpredictable." He mounted and pulled her up behind him. Then he rode straight toward the densest cluster of black coats. Gunfire screamed past them. Crowe leaned low over the saddle, firing in controlled bursts. A rider ahead adjusted to intercept. Crowe shot the man's horse instead. The animal crashed, creating instant obstruction. Confusion rippled. Not panic, but hesitation. That was enough. They burst through the gap. Behind them, Briggs and the remaining ranchers followed. Half made it, half didn't. By the time they cleared the ridge, the desert behind them burned with scattered fires and fallen men. They didn't stop riding until dawn smeared red across the horizon. When they finally slowed, Briggs counted faces. 21, from 37. Briggs looked at Crowe, grief hardening into fury. They knew exactly where to hit. Crowe nodded. They always do. Lillian slid down from the saddle, hands shaking despite her composure. "They're not reacting to us," she whispered. "They're testing us." Crowe looked east, toward the nearest marked symbol on the map. The closest training facility. 3 days' ride. "They wanted us to survive," he said quietly. Briggs stared. "Why?" Crowe's eyes turned cold. "Because they want to see what I'll do." And somewhere far behind them, in the smoking remains of Black Hollow, the hesitant boy stood before the wounded leader. "He spared you," the boy said. The leader pressed cloth against his side wound and smiled faintly. "Good," he murmured. "Compassion is predictable." He looked toward the rising sun. "Now we measure how far it reaches." By the second night, the desert changed. Sand gave way to hardened clay. Sage thinned into brittle scrub. The land rose gradually toward a flat-topped plateau that split the horizon like the edge of a blade. Dry mesa. Crowe reined in at the crest of a low ridge and studied it through a spyglass. There were no flags, no walls, no visible guards. Just an abandoned mining settlement clinging to the base of the mesa. Weather-beaten structures, a collapsed water tower, a silent rail spur that led nowhere. Briggs spat into the dust. "That's it?" "That's the mask," Crowe replied. He adjusted the glass slightly. "There. Movement. Not obvious patrols. Patterns. A glint from a rooftop window. Glass angled for observation. A subtle shift in shadow near the mine entrance. Horses tethered in shade, hidden from long-range view." "They learned subtlety," Crowe murmured. Lillian leaned against a rock beside him. "How many inside?" "Enough." Briggs counted the survivors behind them. 21 had become 19. 2 had peeled off to mislead trackers. Crowe lowered the spyglass. "They won't expect a frontal assault," Briggs said. They will, Crowe answered. They just won't expect patience. He turned to the group. We don't storm it. We bleed it. One of the ranchers frowned. Meaning? Supplies first. Water. Communication. Then extraction routes. Lillian unfolded the coded map beside him. This symbol here, she said, pointing near the mine shaft. It's marked differently than the others. Crowe studied it. Not a barracks marker. Not a supply depot. A circle within a square. His expression darkened. That's command. Briggs narrowed his eyes. You think he's here? Crowe shook his head slowly. No, he won't risk himself yet. Then what is it? Crowe's voice went quiet. Prototype. A silence heavier than gunfire settled over them. Below, a whistle echoed faintly from the settlement. Shift change. Young figures moved between buildings in disciplined lines. Lillian's jaw tightened. They're children. They're soldiers, Briggs corrected grimly. No, she shot back. They're victims. Crowe didn't interrupt. Because they were both right. He began issuing orders. 2 men circle west. Watch for hidden water lines. 3 of you take the ridge north. High ground. No engagement unless necessary. Briggs, you're with me. And me? Lillian asked. Crowe met her eyes. You stay behind the secondary ridge. Her expression hardened instantly. You don't get to sideline me. This isn't vengeance, Crowe said evenly. It's exposure. Then let me see it, she replied. A beat. Crowe nodded once. Stay within sight. They split before dusk. As darkness settled, the facility came alive. Lanterns dimmed low. Patrols rotated silently. No drunken laughter. No careless noise. This wasn't a militia. It was a machine. Crowe and Briggs crawled through scrub toward a low supply shed at the settlement's edge. 2 teenage guards stood outside, talking quietly. One rubbed his hands together against the cold. Crowe watched their rhythm, counted breaths, waited for the moment their gazes drifted apart. He moved like shadow, one hand over a mouth, the other striking precisely at the base of the skull. Silent. Briggs mirrored him on the second guard. They lowered the unconscious boys gently to the ground. Briggs muttered, I hate this part. So do I, Crowe replied. Inside the shed, crates, medical supplies, rations, and vials. Crowe picked one up, clear liquid, label-coated. He uncorked it slightly. The faint metallic scent confirmed it. Enhanced adrenal compound. Refined. Briggs's face tightened. That what they're feeding them? Part of it. Crowe resealed the vial. We destroy the stock. Fire? Crowe shook his head. Too loud. He reached into his coat and pulled a small leather pouch, powder. He sprinkled it into several open ration sacks and water barrels. Briggs frowned. What's that? Neutralizer. You planned this? Crowe didn't answer. Because yes, he had once designed the enhancement, which meant he had also designed its countermeasure. They moved quickly, contaminating the visible supply without leaving obvious signs. Outside, a bell rang once. Not alarm, signal. Crowe froze. From the mine entrance, a group emerged. Not teens, not guards. 4 figures. One of them walked differently. Too steady, too controlled. Crowe narrowed his eyes. Prototype, he whispered. The figure stepped into lantern light. Not a child. Not fully grown either. Late 20s, perhaps. But the eyes. Empty, calculated. Movements precise beyond human norm. A scar ran down the side of his neck where veins pulsed, faintly darker than they should. Briggs inhaled sharply. That ain't natural. The prototype spoke quietly to the supervising officer beside him. Even from this distance, Crowe could see the difference. The others stood like trained soldiers. This one stood like engineered certainty. Lillian appeared beside Crowe silently, having disobeyed distance, but not stealth. She stared. That's what they're building. Crowe nodded once. They refined the instability. The prototype's head turned slightly. Not toward sound, toward instinct. His gaze swept the darkness and paused. directly at Crow's position. Crow didn't move, didn't breathe. The prototype tilted his head, then spoke calmly to the officer. Instantly, patrol patterns shifted. Lanterns repositioned. Search arcs widened. "They sensed us," Briggs whispered. "Not us," Crow replied quietly. "Me." The prototype took a step forward. Slow, deliberate, as if drawn by something only he could detect. Crow's jaw tightened. The enhancements had included pattern recognition linked to behavioral profiling. If the prototype had been trained on Crow's tactics, he wasn't just hunting rebels. He was hunting his maker. A flare shot into the sky. Red. Alarm. But not widespread panic. Targeted. "They know we're here," Lillian breathed. "Not all of us," Crow corrected. He turned to Briggs. "Signal the Ridge Team, Phase 2. Briggs nodded and disappeared into shadow. Below, the prototype's voice carried faintly in the wind. "Captain Crowe," he called calmly. The entire settlement froze at the name. "We know you're watching." Crowe felt Lillian's eyes on him. The prototype stepped further into open ground. "Come down," he continued evenly. "Let's discuss legacy. A trap, obviously." But the confidence in the invitation unsettled him. Crowe rose slowly from cover. Lillian grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" "Changing the pattern." He stepped out onto the ridgeline where moonlight revealed him clearly. A ripple passed through the facility below. The prototype smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd come in person." Crowe rested a hand near his revolver but did not draw. "You're overdosing them," Crowe called down. "Your compound isn't stable long-term." The prototype's smile widened slightly. "Stability is relative." Behind Crowe, far along the western edge of the settlement, a supply shack erupted into silent flame. Then another, the neutralizer reacting, the compound spoiling. Panic began to ripple, small, contained. The prototype didn't look back. "Interesting." "You built the foundation," the prototype said calmly. "I am its evolution." Crow's voice was steady. "You're its flaw." The prototype's eyes sharpened. For the first time, emotion, just a flicker, anger. Below, a supervising officer shouted as medics discovered the compromised supplies. Confusion began fracturing the machine. The prototype turned slightly, assessing, calculating. Crowe stepped back into shadow. "Fall back," he signaled softly to Lillian. But as they retreated, a rifle cracked from an unseen tower. Briggs staggered 20 yards away, hit. The desert night shattered into gunfire. The facility had adapted, and this time, the prototype was leading the counterattack. Part 9. The Hunter's Pattern. Briggs didn't fall. He staggered, caught himself against a rock, and fired back toward the tower in one fluid motion. The riflemen above dropped, but the damage was done. Searchlights flared to life across dry mesa. Not lanterns, but mirrored reflectors angled to catch moonlight and amplify it into blinding white beams. The ridge where Crowe had stood moments earlier lit up like noon. "They've pre-mapped firing lanes," Lillian shouted. Crowe grabbed Briggs by the collar and dragged him behind a stone outcrop. Blood seeped dark through Briggs' sleeve. Through and through, Briggs grunted. Still got the arm. Below, the prototype issued crisp, controlled commands. Patrols split into wedge formations, not chasing wildly, but herding the intruders toward predetermined choke points. "He's not reacting," Crowe muttered. "He's predicting." A flare arced from the southern edge of the mesa. Blue. Crowe's eyes narrowed. "That's not theirs." A second later, a distant explosion rocked the far supply yard. Then another. Secondary charges. Briggs barked a laugh despite the pain. "Your Ridge team ain't subtle." "No," Crowe said quietly. "They're buying us time." The prototype's head turned toward the explosions. For the first time, he recalculated. Crowe seized the opening. "To the drainage trench," he ordered. They sprinted low along the ridge and slid into a narrow erosion cut that snaked toward the settlement's rear edge. Bullets snapped overhead, striking stone instead of flesh. Inside the trench, darkness swallowed them again. Briggs winced, but kept moving. "You're smiling," Lillian said, breathlessly to Crowe. "Am I? You are?" Crowe's eyes stayed forward. "He's fast," Crowe said. "But he hasn't fought unpredictability." Gunfire intensified behind them. The prototype's voice rang out, amplified somehow across the yard. "Cut the trench. Collapse the western wall. Charges detonated ahead." The trench shuddered. Rocks cascaded down, blocking their direct exit. "He's not chasing," Briggs growled. "He's shaping the field." Crowe pivoted instantly. "Then we break symmetry." He climbed the trench wall instead of retreating deeper. Lillian followed without hesitation. They emerged not outside the facility, but inside its outer perimeter, a blind spot between two storage buildings. Alarms echoed across the compound now. Smoke from sabotage supplies drifted across the yard. Crowe moved fast. "Command marker," he said to Lillian. "Find it." She scanned the layout. There, beside the mine shaft. Guards converged around the central structure, a reinforced office built into the rock face. The prototype stood before it, waiting, as if he knew Crowe would come. "Too clean," Briggs muttered. "Always," Crowe agreed. They advanced using smoke as cover, dropping 2 more guards silently along the way. Inside the command building, lantern light flickered over maps pinned to walls. Telegraph equipment, coded dispatch logs. Crowe scanned them quickly. Multiple facilities, all active, all synchronized. Lillian's hands flew over the telegraph key. "What are you doing?" Briggs hissed. "Sending," she replied. "Sending what?" She looked at Crowe. He understood instantly. Exposure wasn't a speech, it was timing. "Send the shipment logs," Crowe ordered, "to every major rail office and newspaper east of here." Briggs blinked. "You memorized the codes?" Crowe didn't answer. He had helped design them. Lillian tapped furiously. Outside, Boots approached. The door exploded inward. The prototype stepped through smoke and splintered wood. Alone. He closed the door behind him calmly. "No more running," he said. Crowe stepped forward. "No more hiding." Briggs raised his rifle. The prototype moved, faster than human reflex. He disarmed Briggs with a precise strike and hurled him against the wall, hard enough to crack timber. Lillian kept tapping. Crowe drew and fired. The prototype twisted unnaturally, bullet grazing his shoulder instead of piercing his heart. He advanced without flinching. "You always relied on precision," the prototype said. "But precision has limits." Crowe holstered mid-motion and lunged instead. Close quarters. Unpredictable angles. The prototype struck with brutal efficiency. Elbows, knees, calculated nerve hits. Crowe absorbed 2 blows that would have dropped most men. Pain sharpened him. He shifted rhythm intentionally, breaking patterns, abandoning textbook form. The prototype's eyes narrowed. He adjusted. Crowe shifted again. Erratic, chaotic, human. A punch slipped past the prototype's guard and connected with his jaw. The first clean hit, not devastating, but unexpected. Outside, distant whistles blew, confusion spreading across the yard. Telegraph messages leaving the facility. The prototype glanced toward the sound. A mistake. Crowe drove forward, slamming him into the telegraph table. Keys scattered, sparks flew. The prototype recovered instantly, lifting Crowe and throwing him across the room. Crowe crashed into a mapboard, splintering it. The prototype stepped closer. "You cannot dismantle inevitability," he said calmly. Crowe wiped blood from his mouth. "No," he agreed, "but I can delay it." Behind the prototype, Lillian finished the final transmission. She grabbed a lantern and hurled it at the coded dispatch logs, stacked near the wall. Flame erupted. The prototype turned. Crowe tackled him through the side window. They crashed outside into dirt and smoke. Gunfire erupted from startled guards. Briggs staggered out behind them, firing one-handed to keep the perimeter at bay. Crowe and the prototype rolled across the ground, grappling in close combat. The prototype's strength was unnatural, but his movements, though refined, were still trained. Crowe shifted to something older, rougher. A bar fight's chaos, a cavalryman's desperation. He baited a strike, then twisted, driving the prototype's own blade into the dark-veined scar at his neck. For the first time, the prototype gasped. Not from pain, from shock. He staggered backward. Veins along his neck pulsed violently, the refined compound reacting badly to trauma. Crowe stood slowly. "It's stable," Crowe said hoarsely. "Until it isn't." The prototype's eyes flickered. Behind them, more buildings caught fire as the sabotage supplies destabilized. Riders scrambled without clear command structure. The machine was fragmenting. The prototype tried to steady himself. But his movements began stuttering, overcorrecting, instability creeping in. He locked eyes with Crowe one final time. "Iteration," he whispered faintly, then collapsed. Crowe didn't celebrate. He turned immediately. "Withdraw!" he shouted. Briggs grabbed Lillian and ran. The facility descended into chaos. Not full destruction, but fracture. And fracture was enough. They mounted stolen horses at the northern edge and rode hard into the night as dry mesa burned behind them. By dawn, smoke rose in a black pillar, visible for miles. Briggs exhaled slowly. One down. Crowe stared east, where the sun bled red over the horizon. "Not down," he said quietly, exposed. Lillian looked at him. "Will it matter?" Crowe thought of the telegraph wires humming across the territories, of newspapers receiving coded proof, of powerful men waking to panic. "Yes," he said at last, "it matters. But far away." In a railcar office lined with polished oak, a well-dressed investor calmly read the incoming telegraph. He folded it once, twice, then dropped it into a fireplace, and reached for another document labeled Acceleration Initiative. Because the order was not a single facility. It was a timeline, and timelines could adapt. Part 10. The Acceleration Initiative. The desert did not forgive noise. By midday, dry mesa was a black scar against the horizon, its smoke thinned by wind, but not forgotten. Crowe and the others rode in silence across a stretch of cracked earth, where even vultures seemed cautious. 19 had become 17. 2 more lost during the withdrawal. Briggs hadn't spoken since dawn. Lillian rode beside Crowe now, not behind him. She'd earned that place somewhere between the church bell and the burning facility. "Did we hurt them?" she asked finally. Crowe didn't answer immediately. "We disrupted one node," he said at last. "We forced them to accelerate." "That's bad." "Yes." Briggs finally broke his silence. "How bad?" Crowe slowed his horse slightly, letting the others ride ahead. "They had a schedule," he said quietly. "Gradual expansion, quiet placement of assets, controlled escalation. And now," Lillian pressed, "now they'll compress the timeline." Briggs frowned. "Meaning?" "More facilities activated at once. Less refinement, more instability. A pause, more blood." They crested a shallow ridge. Ahead, in the distance, a thin rail line cut across the desert like a scar. Beside it, a water stop station, small, isolated. Smoke rose from its chimney. Crowe narrowed his eyes. "Too visible," he murmured. Briggs followed his gaze. "You think they're expecting us there?" "No," Crowe said. "I think they're expecting someone else." They approached cautiously. The station was intact. Quiet. Too quiet. Crowe dismounted first, revolver low, but ready. He stepped onto the wooden platform. The station door creaked open slowly. A man stepped out, well-dressed. Clean boots, no serpent badge. But the calm in his posture was familiar. "You're difficult to predict, Captain Crowe," the man said pleasantly. Crowe didn't lower his weapon. "And you are?" "Merely an intermediary," Briggs muttered. "That's never good," the man smiled faintly. You've caused considerable inconvenience. Lillian stepped forward. Dry Mesa is burning. Yes, the man replied calmly. An acceptable loss. Crowe studied him. No visible weapon, but confidence like armor. You're not field command, Crowe said. You're funding. The man inclined his head slightly. Investment management, Briggs spat. You're bankrolling child soldiers. I'm stabilizing a volatile frontier, the man corrected smoothly. Crowe's voice went cold. By manufacturing conflict. The man gestured lightly toward the rail line. Conflict already exists. We simply control its direction. Lillian's jaw tightened. You mean profit from it? The man's smile widened just enough to confirm it. A distant whistle blew. Not from this station. From the tracks beyond the bend. Crowe's eyes flicked east. A train was coming. What's on it? He asked. Acceleration, the man replied. The train emerged around the curve. Long, heavy, armored freight cars interspersed with standard cargo. Unmarked, but guarded. Black-coated riders flanked it on horseback. Crowe's stomach tightened. They're moving supply. Yes. Where? Everywhere. The man stepped closer. You see, Captain, exposure forces adaptation. Public panic will justify increased security measures, emergency authorizations, expanded training. You'll use the outrage, Lillian realized. Of course, the man said mildly. People demand protection when frightened. Crowe's hand tightened around his revolver. If I shoot you, he said quietly, does it change anything? The man met his gaze calmly. No. Honest. And that honesty was worse than arrogance. The train slowed as it approached the water stop. Workers emerged, but not local men. Young trainees, disciplined, efficient. This shipment contains refined compound and deployment orders, the man continued. 3 new facilities activate within the week. Briggs growled low. We can hit the train. Crowe's eyes tracked its length. Too many guards. Open terrain. Heavy steel. High casualties. The intermediary watched him think. You're weighing lives, the man observed. Admirable. Crowe looked at him sharply. You're not. I weigh outcomes. The train hissed to a stop. Guards dismounted. Crates began transferring methodically. Lillian leaned close to Crowe. If that train leaves, I know. Briggs cracked his neck slowly. We ain't outrunning it. Crowe's mind shifted gears. Not attack, disruption. He studied the coupling between the 3rd and 4th cars. Reinforced, but not invulnerable. The water tower loomed overhead. Wooden. Old. Briggs, Crowe said quietly. How good are your men with long rifles? Briggs followed his gaze upward. A slow grin formed. Good enough. Crowe holstered his revolver. We're not stopping the train. Lillian looked confused. Then what? We're rerouting it. Moments later, 2 of Briggs' best marksmen took position behind rocky cover near the water tower. Crowe mounted again, riding openly toward the station platform. The intermediary sighed softly. Must we? Yes, Crowe replied. The first rifle cracked. The water tower exploded at its base. A second shot shattered the support struts. Thousands of gallons of water crashed down in a roaring cascade directly onto the train's midsection. Steam erupted violently as scalding metal met sudden flood. Guards shouted in confusion. Visibility vanished in white vapor. Briggs' riders charged from the west, not toward the train, but toward the switching lever further down the line. The intermediary's calm fractured. You can't. Crowe struck him hard across the jaw, sending him sprawling. In the chaos, Briggs' men forced the rail switch into reverse alignment. When the engineer, panicked by collapsing visibility, engaged forward throttle, the train lurched onto the alternate spur, one that led not east, but north, toward unfinished track over unstable ground. Crowe mounted and rode hard. The train picked up speed, unable to brake effectively under soaked, warped lines. Black-coated riders scrambled but couldn't correct the misalignment in time. The armored freight thundered onto the incomplete spur. Wooden ties snapped, Metal screamed. Then the lead cars derailed spectacularly, dragging the rest into twisted ruin in a storm of sparks and splintered steel. Silence followed. Then distant fires as ruptured cargo ignited. Crowe reined in on a ridge overlooking the wreck. Lillian stared, breathless. Briggs let out a long whistle. "That'll slow 'em." Crowe nodded once. Yes. Below, amid wreckage and smoke, surviving black coats regrouped with terrifying efficiency. Even in disaster, they adapted. The intermediary crawled from the station platform, bloodied but alive. He looked up at Crowe with something new in his eyes. Not fear, calculation. "You can delay," he called hoarsely, "but acceleration is already in motion." Crowe stared down at him. "Then we'll change the motion." He turned his horse. Because the train had carried more than compound. It had carried deployment orders. And now, those orders were burning in the wreckage. For the first time, the timeline had fractured. But fractured timelines were dangerous, unpredictable. And somewhere beyond the horizon, men with deeper pockets and colder hearts were already drafting the next phase. Part 11. Fracture Lines. The wreck burned for hours. By nightfall, the twisted railcars glowed like molten ribs against the dark. Smoke drifted low across the desert, carrying with it the sharp stink of chemicals and scorched iron. Crowe watched from a distant ridge through a spyglass. Black-coated survivors had established a perimeter around the derailment site. Not chaotic, not panicked, efficient. "They're salvaging," Lillian said quietly beside him. Yes, even in failure, the order preserved assets. Briggs approached from behind, arm freshly bandaged. "Scouts say riders are splitting off, some heading east, some south." Crowe lowered the glass. "They're redistributing command." "Meaning?" "They expected losses." Lillian folded her arms against the night chill. "So what actually hurt them?" Crowe looked back at the burning train. "The orders." Briggs nodded slowly. "You think they were centralized?" "They had to be. Acceleration needs coordination." "And now?" Lillian asked. "Now regional commanders will improvise." Briggs gave a humorless chuckle. "Improvising warlords. That's comforting." Crowe didn't smile. Because decentralized violence was harder to predict, harder to contain. A rider approached fast from the north, one of Briggs's scouts. He slid from the saddle, breath tight. "There's movement near Copper Ridge," he reported. "Not order. Town militia. Armed." Crowe stiffened slightly. "Why?" "They heard about Dry Mesa and the train." Lillian frowned. "Already?" "Telegraph lines weren't all burned," the scout replied. "Word spreading." Crowe felt it settle. The fracture. Exposure was working, but uncontrolled. Briggs looked uneasy. "Militia's good." "Not if they panic," Crowe said quietly. "Because frightened towns did dangerous things." "What are they planning?" Lillian asked. The scout hesitated. "They're rounding up anyone wearing dark coats." Silence. Crowe closed his eyes briefly. "Vigilantes," Briggs muttered. "Reactionary chaos," Crowe corrected. "The order thrived on instability. If towns began executing suspects without proof, the narrative would shift, not from corruption, but from rebellion." Crowe mounted immediately. "We ride to Copper Ridge." Briggs frowned. "That's north. Other facilities are east." "Right now," Crowe said firmly, "the war isn't with facilities." They rode through the night. By dawn, Copper Ridge came into view. A mining town perched along a shallow canyon. Smoke rose from more than chimneys. Crowe felt it before he saw it. Tension. The town square was packed. Men with rifles stood guard. A wooden platform had been hastily assembled near the well. 3 young men knelt upon it. Bound. 2 wore simple ranch clothes. The third, a dark coat, not serpent-badged, just black. The crowd shouted accusations. "Order sympathizers! Burn them out!" Crowe rode straight into the square without slowing. Rifles lifted instantly. Briggs and the others followed. "Stand down!" someone yelled. Crowe raised his hand slightly but did not dismount. "Who's in charge?" he called calmly. A broad-shouldered man stepped forward. Town sheriff, by the look of him. "You, Crowe?" "I am." The sheriff spat into the dust. "Then, you started this." Crowe met his gaze. "No, I revealed it." The sheriff gestured to the bound men. These boys were seen talking to riders from Dry Mesa. Lillian looked closer. "They're barely 18. "Old enough?" someone shouted. The crowd murmured agreement. Crowe dismounted slowly. He walked toward the platform without asking permission. Rifles tracked him. He stopped before the kneeling men. The one in the dark coat looked terrified. Not defiant. Not trained. Terrified. "What's your name?" Crowe asked him quietly. "Daniel," the boy whispered. "Where'd you get the coat?" "It's my brother's." "He works rail security." Crowe turned to the sheriff. "You have proof?" The sheriff hesitated. "We have suspicion." Crowe's voice hardened slightly. "The order wants this." Murmurs rippled. The sheriff bristled. "You saying we should do nothing?" "I'm saying," Crowe replied evenly, "if you start hanging boys for clothing, you become their justification." The crowd shifted uneasily. Lillian stepped forward. "They profit when towns turn on themselves," she said clearly. "Fear is their currency." Briggs crossed his arms, backing the message with sheer presence. The sheriff studied Crowe. "And if we let them go and they're guilty?" Crowe met his eyes. "Then I'll answer for it." A long pause. The town waited. Finally, the sheriff cut the ropes. The three boys collapsed forward, shaking. The crowd didn't cheer. But they didn't riot either. The fracture line narrowed slightly. As the crowd dispersed, the sheriff pulled Crowe aside. "There's talk," he said quietly. "Investors pulling guards from smaller towns, consolidating." Crowe's mind sharpened. "Where?" "Rail hubs, banking depots, and—" He lowered his voice further. "A gathering in Ashcroft." Crowe's eyes narrowed. "Ashcroft, major rail junction." "And who's gathering?" Crowe asked. "Rail barons, political delegates, private security heads." Lillian inhaled slowly. A summit. Briggs' expression darkened. "They're accelerating strategy." Crowe nodded once. The order wasn't collapsing. It was reorganizing publicly, under the guise of security reform. He looked east. Ashcroft lay 2 days' ride. If the order pivoted from shadow operations to sanctioned enforcement, they would gain legal authority. And then, there would be no exposing them, only resisting them. Crowe mounted again. Briggs frowned. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Yes. We can't just ride into a summit of investors." Crowe's expression turned grim. "No." He looked at Lillian. "We walk in." Her eyes widened slightly. "As what?" Crowe's voice was calm. "As proof." Behind them, Copper Ridge returned to uneasy normalcy. But word was spreading faster now. Not just of terror, but of questions. And questions were more dangerous than bullets. Because if Ashcroft formalized the acceleration initiative, the order would no longer need secrecy. It would wear a badge. And Crowe would be fighting something far harder to shoot. Ashcroft did not look like a battlefield. It looked like progress. Rail lines braided in from 3 directions, converging beneath a vast iron and glass station that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Fresh brick buildings lined the main avenue. Banners fluttered from lampposts. Security and Stability Summit Crowe studied the sign without expression. "They don't even hide it," Lillian murmured. "They don't need to," Briggs replied. Crowe had changed clothes. The long ash-gray duster was gone, replaced by a dark civilian coat, stripped of insignia. His revolver rested concealed but reachable. Lillian wore a simple traveling dress, dust brushed clean. The iron ledger box remained strapped inside their saddlebag. Briggs and the others waited outside town limits. "If we're not back by nightfall," Briggs had said, "we start a fire loud enough to distract God." Crowe hoped it wouldn't come to that. They entered Ashcroft on foot. No black coats patrolled openly. Instead, uniformed rail security, deputized marshals, private guards wearing discreet silver cufflinks, shaped like coiled serpents. Not badges, accessories. The transition had begun. Inside the grand station hall, polished floors reflected sunlight pouring through the glass roof. Delegates gathered in clusters, speaking in measured tones. Men in tailored suits, state officials, industrial magnates. Crowe recognized faces from the ledger, alive, untouched. Lillian stiffened beside him. They look respectable. They are, Crowe said quietly. That's the point. At the far end of the hall, a raised platform had been assembled. A banner behind it read, Regional Security Partnership Initiative. Crowe almost smiled. New name. Same design. A man stepped to the podium. Well-groomed, confident. The same intermediary from the rail station. His jaw bore a faint bruise, but his posture radiated control. Ladies and gentlemen, he began smoothly. Recent acts of sabotage have proven what we have long discussed. Instability grows unchecked across our territories. Murmurs of agreement. Lillian's hand curled into a fist. He continued. Facilities burned. Supply lines disrupted. Rail infrastructure attacked. Crowe's eyes narrowed. The narrative had already shifted. Such lawlessness demands coordination, the intermediary said. Deserter. Crowe's voice did not rise. A witness. Lillian stepped beside him and opened the iron box. The ledger gleamed under sunlight. Funding records, she said clearly. Names, transfers, direct investment in paramilitary development. Gasps, uneasy shifting. One of the delegates stepped forward. That's an outrageous accusation. Crowe flipped the ledger open and read 3 names aloud. Precise, documented. A man in the second row paled. Another delegate snapped, fabrication. Then deny it publicly, Crowe replied evenly. The intermediary's eyes sharpened. You attack security efforts during a time of crisis, he said coolly, while armed radicals burn facilities and derail trains. Crowe met his gaze. Those facilities trained children. A flicker of discomfort crossed a few faces, but not enough. The intermediary spread his hands. Unverified claims. Lillian stepped forward boldly. My father was killed for discovering this. A murmur swept the hall. Emotion cut differently than accusation. The intermediary seized it instantly. Tragic, he said smoothly. Which is precisely why structured oversight is required. He turned to the crowd. Without unified authority, chaos breeds more tragedy. Applause again. Stronger this time. Crowe felt the shift. They weren't defending the order. They were defending stability. And stability was a powerful illusion. A rail magnate near the front cleared his throat. Captain Crowe, he said carefully, if such operations existed, are they not now dismantled? Crowe didn't hesitate. They're accelerating. The intermediary smiled faintly. Baseless fear. Crowe's voice hardened slightly. 3 facilities activate within the week. Under this new initiative, a pause. The intermediary's calm cracked just enough. How would you know that? Crowe held up a folded document retrieved from the train wreck. Partially burned, but legible. Deployment authorization signatures. Several of the same names present in the room. Whispers spread. The magnate leaned forward. This document was found on a train rerouted to avoid exposure, Crowe finished. Silence thickened. For a moment, doubt entered the room. The intermediary stepped down from the podium slowly. Captain, he said quietly, approaching. Even if your claims were true, what would you propose? Crowe answered without hesitation. Independent investigation, public oversight, immediate suspension of private security expansions. Laughter broke out from a delegate in the back. Naive, the man scoffed. Dangerous, another added. The intermediary's expression turned sympathetic. You see, he said gently, The frontier cannot wait for moral debates. He turned to the assembled officials. I motion immediate ratification of the Regional Security Partnership. Hands began to rise, not unanimously, but steadily. Lillian's face went pale. They're voting it in, she whispered. Crowe stood perfectly still, because he saw it now. Exposure alone was not enough. The order had embedded itself into necessity. The vote concluded. Majority approval. Applause filled the hall. The intermediary turned back to Crowe. You have passion, he said softly, but history favors structure. Guards stepped forward. Crowe did not resist as they approached. Lillian clutched the ledger tighter. You'll arrest us? She demanded. The intermediary smiled faintly. No. He leaned closer to Crowe. You'll be invited. Crowe's eyes sharpened. Invited to what? The intermediary's voice dropped to a whisper. To witness the first public demonstration of progress. Outside, a whistle blew sharply. Not a train. A signal. Crowe's stomach tightened. Through the station windows, riders appeared along the rail yard perimeter. Uniformed. Sanctioned. Serpent cufflinks catching the light. The transition was complete. The order no longer hid in shadows. It had stepped into daylight. And it wore legitimacy. The intermediary straightened. Tomorrow, he announced to the hall, we unveil a new era of protection. Crowe met his gaze steadily. Then, tomorrow, he replied quietly, you'll reveal what you really built. The intermediary's smile didn't falter. By all means, he said, attend. As the hall resumed its applause, Crowe felt something settle in his chest. This was no longer about secret facilities or hidden ledgers. It was about narrative. And tomorrow, the order would stage its proof, which meant Crowe would need to dismantle it in front of everyone, or watch the frontier become something far colder than war. Ashcroft woke early. By sunrise, the rail yard had transformed into a stage. A raised viewing platform overlooked an open training ground carved beside the tracks. Fresh white fencing enclosed a wide dirt arena. Flags bearing the new insignia, not the serpent, but a clean geometric crest labeled Regional Security Authority, fluttered in the wind. Crowe stood at the edge of the crowd with Lillian beside him. Neither had slept. They rebranded overnight, she murmured. They were prepared, Crowe replied. Briggs' men were positioned discreetly throughout the town, disguised as freight handlers, stable boys, dock workers, watching, waiting. On the platform above, investors and officials took their seats. The intermediary stood among them, immaculate as ever. A brass band struck a triumphant chord. Crowe felt sick. The arena gates opened. A unit marched out in perfect formation. Uniforms tailored, movements synchronized, rifles polished. They were older than the dry Mesa trainees, early 20s perhaps, refined, disciplined, human, or close enough. The crowd murmured approvingly. The intermediary stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. Voice amplified across the yard. You have heard rumors, exaggerations, fabrications. His gaze flicked briefly toward Crowe in the crowd. Today, you will see truth. The unit halted sharply. Regional security officers, the intermediary continued, trained for rapid response, high-threat containment, and civilian protection. On cue, 3 volunteers rushed the arena, masked men armed with blank-firing pistols. The officers reacted instantly. Fluid, precise, non-lethal takedowns executed in seconds. Applause erupted. Crowe didn't clap. Choreographed, he muttered. Lillian nodded. Too clean. The intermediary smiled as the attackers were restrained gently and escorted out. Order without cruelty, he declared. Crowe scanned the officers closely. Something was wrong. Too still between commands. Too controlled. He saw it in their eyes. The same faint dilation. The same controlled breathing pattern. Compound, refined further, but still present. But the intermediary raised a hand. For the final demonstration. The arena gate opened again. This time, a man staggered in, unmasked, disoriented. He wore a miner's coat. Crowe stiffened. The man's wrists were bound loosely, enough to appear restrained, but still mobile. The crowd shifted uneasily. This individual, the intermediary said calmly, was apprehended sabotaging rail infrastructure. Lillian's voice dropped. That's not a volunteer. Crowe's jaw hardened. The man looked terrified. The intermediary gestured. Observe measured restraint under real threat conditions. The bound man suddenly broke into a panicked run toward the fencing. Guards shoved him back toward the officers. He shouted something, but the band struck a loud chord, drowning it out. Crowe stepped forward instinctively. Lillian grabbed his sleeve. Wait. One officer intercepted the miner. Too fast. Too forceful. The man hit the ground hard. Another officer pinned him. The restraint should have ended there. Instead, the lead officer tightened his grip unnecessarily. The miner gasped. The officer's eyes flickered, a tremor in his jaw. Crowe saw it instantly. Overstimulation. The compound reacting under adrenaline. Pull back, Crowe muttered under his breath. But no one in the arena heard him. The officer's restraint escalated. The miner struggled harder. The crowd murmured. The intermediary's smile thinned slightly. Stand down, he called calmly. The officer didn't respond immediately. A half-second delay. Tiny, but visible. Then, the officer's movements became sharper, less controlled. He struck the miner once, hard. The crowd gasped. That's excessive, someone muttered near the platform. The intermediary raised his voice slightly. Officer, disengage. The officer froze, breathing heavy. Veins along his neck darkened faintly beneath the collar. Crowe felt the moment tipping. Now, he whispered. Briggs, positioned near the eastern fence, fired a single shot into the air. The sharp crack shattered the staged rhythm. The officer's head snapped toward the sound. Instinct overriding command. The other officers shifted defensively. Formation fractured. The crowd began to panic. Stay calm, the intermediary shouted. But calm had left. The overstimulated officer's breathing accelerated. His pupils widened further. The compound, under stress and public pressure, destabilized. He shoved the miner aside violently and turned toward the nearest perceived threat. The crowd, Crowe moved. He vaulted the low barrier and crossed the arena dirt in seconds. Guards shouted, rifles raised. But Crowe didn't draw his weapon. He approached the officer head-on. Look at me, Crowe commanded sharply. The officer hesitated. Recognition flickered. Captain, the officer murmured faintly. Crowe saw it then. This wasn't a prototype. This was a graduate. Someone from the second wave. You're overstimulated, Crowe said calmly. Control your breathing. The officer's hands trembled. Crowe lowered his voice further. You were trained to follow pattern. Break it. The officer blinked rapidly. Sweat beaded along his temple. The crowd was in full unrest now. Delegates shouting. Guards unsure whether to fire. The intermediary's composure cracked fully for the first time. Remove him, he barked. But no one moved fast enough. Crowe stepped closer. You are not a weapon, he said firmly. The officer's jaw clenched. For one terrifying heartbeat. It could go either way. Then, the officer dropped to one knee, breathing ragged, but controlled. The compound spike plateaued, crisis contained. Silence rippled outward from the arena center. The illusion had fractured. Not dramatically, not explosively, but undeniably. The intermediary stepped down from the platform slowly, face pale, but composed. A temporary imbalance, he announced loudly. All systems require refinement. Murmurs replaced applause. Doubt had entered the room, small, but alive. Crowe helped the miner to his feet. The man whispered, They said it'd be blanks, I didn't. Crowe squeezed his shoulder lightly. It's over, not the war, But the demonstration. The intermediary locked eyes with Crowe across the arena. No smile now. Only calculation. "You forced the timeline again," he said quietly. Crowe met his gaze evenly. "No," he replied. "You revealed it." Around them, delegates argued in tight clusters, some furious, some frightened, some reconsidering. The order hadn't fallen, but its flawless debut had cracked, and cracks spread. Lillian stepped beside Crowe. "Did we win?" she asked softly. Crowe watched the officials fracture into factions. "No," he said. "But now they have to choose openly. And open choices left records. Records could be traced, and traced lines could be cut." But as the crowd thinned and tension lingered heavy in Ashcroft, a courier slipped quietly from the rail yard with sealed dispatches marked Phase Blackglass. Acceleration, it seemed, had just changed shape. Ashcroft did not sleep that night. Lanterns burned in office windows until dawn. Messengers rode in and out of town at all hours. Delegates who had applauded confidently that morning now argued behind closed doors, voices tight with calculation. Crowe stood on the roof of a freight warehouse, overlooking the rail yard. Lillian joined him quietly. "They're splitting," she said. "Half want investigation, half want expansion faster." Crowe nodded. "Pressure creates fracture, and fracture creates risk," she replied. "Yes." Below, uniformed regional security officers maintained patrol lines. Tighter now, less theatrical. The demonstration had shaken them, but not broken them. Briggs climbed onto the roof, breathing slightly hard. "We intercepted something," he said. He handed Crowe a folded dispatch taken from a courier 2 miles west of town. Crowe opened it. 3 words at the top. Phase Blackglass activated. His jaw tightened. Below that, deployment codes, urban zones, rail choke points, banking districts. Lillian read over his shoulder. "Blackglass," she whispered. Crowe stared at the horizon. Containment through visibility. Briggs frowned. "Speak plain." "They're abandoning subtlety," Crowe said quietly. "They'll flood major towns with sanctioned security, visible presence, curfews, weapon registrations." "Under legal authority," Lillian realized. "Yes." Briggs cursed under his breath. "That ain't a secret war anymore." "No," Crowe agreed. "It's policy." He folded the dispatch carefully. "If they pass Blackglass through regional councils, they don't need hidden facilities." "They'll recruit openly," Lillian said. Crowe nodded. "And they'll label opposition as insurgency." Below, a column of officers marched across the yard in precise formation. Public confidence could be rebuilt quickly with enough uniforms. "What's the weakness?" Briggs asked. Crowe didn't answer immediately. He watched the officers move, disciplined, efficient. But one detail caught his eye. Each officer wore a small metallic clasp at the collar. Polished, uniform. He had seen that clasp before. At Dry Mesa, compound regulator. Externally integrated now. "Blackglass depends on public trust," Crowe said slowly. "And?" Briggs pressed. "And trust breaks loudly." Lillian looked at him carefully. "You don't mean another derailment?" "No." Crowe's voice was steady. "I mean proof." "Proof of what?" Briggs asked. Crowe turned toward the rail yard. "That the compound still isn't stable under prolonged stress." Lillian's eyes widened slightly. "You want to force another overstimulation." "Not force," Crowe corrected. "Reveal." Briggs didn't look convinced. "That's risky." "Yes." "But Blackglass centralizes deployment," Crowe continued. "They'll conduct live urban drills. Public showcases." Lillian understood first. "If the compound destabilizes in a crowded city." "The illusion shatters," Crowe finished. Below, whistles blew. A formation broke apart into squads moving toward town sectors. Briggs rubbed his beard. "They'll say sabotage." "They always will," Crowe said. "But repetition breeds doubt." A pause. "And doubt spreads faster than fear." Lillian studied the officers again. They're more refined than Dry Mesa. Yes. But refinement narrows tolerance. Crowe stepped back from the roof edge. Black glass relies on synchronized adrenaline thresholds. Push too high, they spike. Push too low, they underperform. Briggs raised an eyebrow. You memorize their tolerances. Crowe's voice was flat. I designed the first ones. Silence settled briefly between them. Then Lillian asked quietly, where do they demonstrate next? Crowe unfolded the dispatch again. His finger traced a location. Redwater City. Briggs exhaled sharply. That's not a frontier town. No, Crowe agreed. It's a population center, rail hub, banking district, dense, crowded. Perfect for a public stabilization drill. If something goes wrong there, Lillian whispered, it won't be containable. That's the point, Crowe said softly. Below, the intermediary exited the main station surrounded by officials. He paused briefly, scanning the rooftops. His gaze passed near Crowe's position, not quite spotting him, but sensing pressure. Crowe watched him carefully. He knows, Lillian said. Yes, and he'll anticipate you. Yes, Briggs sighed. So what's the move, Captain? Crowe folded the dispatch and slid it into his coat. We go to Redwater. And then? Briggs asked. Crowe's eyes hardened. We don't attack. Lillian frowned slightly. Then what? Crowe looked toward the east where rail lines stretched toward distant smoke and industry. We let black glass demonstrate itself. Briggs studied him. And if it doesn't fail? Crowe's expression didn't change. It will. Below, the intermediary mounted a carriage bound for the telegraph office. Orders would already be moving, timelines compressing again. Phase black glass wasn't a reaction. It was contingency. And contingencies were harder to predict. But predictability wasn't Crowe's weapon anymore. Visibility was. As dawnlight crept over Ashcroft, Crowe climbed down from the roof. Lillian walked beside him. Are we close to ending this? She asked quietly. Crowe looked at the waking city, at the polished uniforms, at the officials drafting policy that would reshape the frontier. No, he said honestly. We're close to changing it. Behind them, unnoticed, a familiar teenage figure stood in the alley across the street. The hesitant boy from the tunnel, watching, listening, and for the first time, not wearing a serpent badge. Redwater City did not resemble the frontier. It was brick and steel. Telegraph wires webbed the skyline. Smoke from factories coiled into a pale morning sky. Crowds moved with purpose along paved streets. Order already lived here, which made black glass easier to sell. Banners hung across the central square. Public safety demonstration. Regional Security Authority. Crowe stood among the gathered citizens, hat low, collar high. Lillian stood at his side. Briggs and the others were scattered through the crowd. And near the fountain, the hesitant boy. No badge, no uniform, just watching. You told him to question orders, Lillian murmured without looking at Crowe. I did, and he listened. Crowe didn't answer. On the raised platform, the intermediary addressed the crowd with polished confidence. Redwater, he announced. Today, you witness the future of lawful protection. Applause rolled politely through the square. Columns of black glass officers marched into position. 40 this time. Uniform, precise, calm. Crowe scanned their collars. Regulators active, breathing synchronized. Too synchronized. A whistle blew. The drill began. Simulated riot conditions. Actors in plain clothes pushed against barricades. Smoke flares ignited. The officers responded with flawless formation control. Shield advance, measured restraint, crowd management without visible brutality. The citizens murmured approval. The intermediary smiled. Crowe felt the weight of the moment. If nothing broke, black glass would become doctrine. Lillian glanced at him. Now? She whispered. Not yet, he said quietly. Because failure required pressure. and pressure required unpredictability. On cue, a carriage wheel snapped unexpectedly near the square's edge. A horse reared violently, shrieking. The crowd jolted. Not part of the drill. Real panic rippled outward. One black-glass officer turned too sharply. Another misread the spike in heart rates around him. Crowe saw it. The tremor, small, but present. "Now," he whispered. Briggs fired a single blank round into the air from within the crowd. Not at the officers, above them. The sound cracked sharp and close. Adrenaline surged. The synchronized breathing shattered. Two officers shifted into high alert response. One overcorrected. Another's regulator blinked faintly red. Crowe stepped forward into open view. "Stand down!" he shouted clearly. The lead officer's eyes locked onto him. Recognition flickered. Memory from Ashcroft. Stress levels climbed. Crowe moved closer, deliberately. "You are exceeding tolerance," he called. The officer's jaw tightened. His partner misinterpreted the approach as threat. Shields lifted aggressively. The crowd recoiled. The intermediary stepped forward urgently. "Maintain formation," but the system had been calibrated for staged chaos, not layered unpredictability. A child screamed nearby as the panicked horse broke free and bolted into the square. An officer lunged to intercept, too forcefully. He slammed into a civilian, hard. The man hit the cobblestones and did not move. Gasps erupted. Another officer shoved back a group of bystanders. Regulators blinked again. Red, red. One dropped to a knee, breathing ragged. Not violent, but visibly unstable. The illusion fractured, not through massacre, but through visible strain. Crowe reached the lead officer. "You're overheating," he said firmly. The officer's voice trembled. "I am within parameters." "No," Crowe replied calmly. "You're beyond them." The officer's hands shook. Around them, the crowd began pulling back in fear. Not of rioters, but of the officers. The intermediary shouted for medical teams. But doubt had already landed. Whispers spread faster than commands. "They're drugged. They're unstable." "Is this what they're funding?" A journalist scribbled furiously near the fountain. Lillian stepped onto a crate and raised the ledger high. "They accelerated this without oversight," she called out. "This is what happens when control replaces accountability." Crowe didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the officer. "Break pattern," he said quietly. "Breathe outside command." The officer hesitated, then closed his eyes. Breathing slowed. The regulator dimmed from red to amber. Stability returning. But the damage, public, visible, uncontained. The intermediary's composure finally cracked in full view. He looked not angry, but cornered. Reporters pressed forward. Officials whispered urgently among themselves. The crowd no longer applauded. It questioned, and questioning was irreversible. Briggs appeared beside Crowe. "That's as clean a fracture as we're going to get," he muttered. Crowe nodded once. "We don't push further, because collapse would feed the narrative. But visible instability, that planted seeds." The demonstration was called off under the pretense of technical recalibration. The crowd dispersed in uneasy clusters, not riot, not revolt, but reconsideration. The intermediary approached Crowe quietly amid the dispersing square. "You're skilled," he said, voice low. Crowe met his gaze evenly. "You built something fragile," he replied. The intermediary exhaled slowly. "Public oversight will demand revisions. Yes, but security will still be demanded. Yes." They stood in silence for a moment. "You didn't destroy it," the intermediary said finally. "No," Crowe agreed. "I exposed its cost." The man studied him. "This isn't over. It never is," Crowe replied. The intermediary turned and walked away toward a carriage surrounded by officials arguing in tight circles. The order would adapt again, but this time under scrutiny. And scrutiny changed behavior. Lillian joined Crowe as the square emptied. "Did we win?" she asked softly. Crowe watched a group of citizens surrounding a shaken black-glass officer, not attacking him, but questioning him. "No," he said. "We shifted it." Briggs mounted his horse nearby. "So what now, Captain?" Crowe looked across Redwater. At newspapers already printing special editions. At telegraph wires humming with doubt instead of silence. "At the next version," he said quietly. The hesitant boy stepped into view from across the square. He met Crowe's eyes. No salute, no hostility. Just understanding. Crowe gave the smallest nod. The boy turned and walked into the crowd. Unclaimed by the order, unclaimed by rebellion. Free to choose. Lillian slid the ledger back into the iron box. "We keep it?" she asked. "For now," Crowe said. "Truth doesn't expire." They mounted and rode out of Redwater as the sun dipped low behind factory smoke. The frontier would not be clean again. There would be new initiatives, new names, new strategies. But the next time power tried to step quietly into daylight, there would already be eyes waiting. And that, Crowe knew, was how wars truly ended. Not with silence, but with exposure. The end.